Greetings and welcome. Today, I will tell you the story of my life. In my own words, I am John Tyler, the 10th President of the United States. Perhaps, when you think of American presidents, the names that first come to mind are George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, or Abraham Lincoln. Washington, the commander who led our revolution and is remembered as the father of his country. Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence and the man who doubled the size of our young nation with the Louisiana Purchase. Lincoln, who guided the Union through its darkest trial in the Civil War. The MY name, in comparison, is less often spoken. And when it is, people usually recall only one thing, that I was the first man to become president not by election, but by succession. When William Henry Harrison died only a month into his term, I was thrust into the presidency, an unprecedented moment in American history. Many called me the accidental president. But I tell you now, my life was much more than that one event. I was a son of Virginia, raised on the values of family honor and personal duty. I was a student of law, a defender of states' rights, a man who rose through the rough and tumbling world of politics. I was a president who clashed with my own party, who stood often in isolation, and yet who tried always to remain faithful to the Constitution as I understood it. In my later years, I watched this nation I once led fracture into pieces, and I made choices that would forever mark my legacy. My story is one of ambition and conviction, but also of controversy and contradiction. So, let me invite you to step into my world. Come with me to the fields of Virginia, to the halls of Congress, to the presidency itself, and to the twilight of a life lived in turbulent times. When you hear my story, I hope you will see me not merely as an accidental president, but as a man of principle, shaped by family, faith, and the unyielding struggles of a young nation. Let us begin with my birth and the foundations of my family. I was born on March 29, 1790, in Charles City County, Virginia. The United States was only 14 years old. The smoke of the Revolution had barely cleared, and the young republic was still fragile, still uncertain of the road ahead. My family belonged to one of Virginia's long-established lines. My father, John Tyler Sr., was a prominent judge and had served as governor of Virginia. He was a man of stern character, respected by all who knew him. My father believed deeply in the principles of Republican government, in the sovereignty of the states, and in the idea that liberty must always be defended from the encroachment of centralized power. These were not just abstract beliefs to him. They were lessons he impressed upon me from the time I was a boy. My mother, Mary Armistead Tyler, was a gentle and affectionate woman, but I lost her when I was only 7 years old. The memory of her face, her kindness, and her voice stayed with me, but her death left an emptiness in my heart. That loss taught me early the fragility of life and gave me a solitude of spirit that never quite left me. That I grew up on our family plantation, surrounded by the rhythms of Southern life. The land was wide and fertile. Enslaved laborers worked the fields, a reality of Virginia society that I observed daily as a child. At the time, I accepted it as the order of things, though in later years, this system and its consequences would stand at the center of the nation's greatest conflict. Even then, the presence of slavery marked the South in ways that shaped both my outlook and my destiny. As a boy, I found refuge in books. My father's library was my sanctuary. I devoured history, philosophy, and literature. I read of Greece and Rome and imagined their struggles for liberty. I studied the Bible and reflected on its moral lessons. I read political works that spoke of the nature of government, of the balance between authority and freedom. All of this stirred within me a sense of purpose. My father did not indulge me. He was demanding, and he carried the weight of expectation into my upbringing. I still hear his words, "John, power is not a privilege to be enjoyed. It is a trust to be fulfilled." Those words became the compass by which I measured my life. In our home, I often listened to my father and his colleagues debate the issues of the day. They spoke of the Constitution, of the rights of states, of the legacy of Washington and Jefferson. Though I was but a boy, their voices planted seeds in my mind. I began to realize that America was not a finished nation, but one still being shaped, its direction not yet determined. My childhood was thus a mixture of privilege and loss, of expectation and discovery. I had the honor of a family name, the stern guidance of a father determined to see me succeed, and the solitude left by my mother's passing. Even in those early years, I felt within me a sense of duty. I asked myself, what is a man's role in this world? Is it simply to live, or to stand for something greater? I did not yet know the answer, but I knew this. If I were to make something of myself, it would be through learning, through discipline, and through the responsibility that comes with both freedom and family. This was the soil from which my life grew. It was here, in Virginia, that the foundations of my beliefs and my character were laid. And it was from here that I would set forth on the journey that carried me to the study of law, the chambers of Congress, and ultimately, to the presidency itself. As I grew from childhood into youth, it became clear that my future would not remain within the boundaries of my family's plantation. My father expected more of me. He expected me to learn, to lead, and to carry forward the honor of the Tyler name. At the age of 12, I was sent away to preparatory schooling under private tutors. The subjects were rigorous: Latin, Greek, mathematics, and the classics of Western thought. I immersed myself in the works of Cicero, Homer, and Virgil, but also in the principles of government laid out by Locke and Montesquieu. These authors spoke to me of liberty, duty, and the fragile balance between authority and freedom. I was not a strong boy physically. I was lean, even frail at times. But I had a quick mind and a relentless determination. I found joy in debate, in crafting arguments, in testing ideas against one another. Already, I sensed that my path would not be in commerce or in the life of a planter, but in the realm of law and politics. In 1802, when I was only 12 years old, I entered the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, one of the most respected institutions of learning in the South. It was an intimidating place for a boy of my age, surrounded by older students, many of them already seasoned in thought and conversation. But I embraced the challenge. At William and Mary, I studied history, philosophy, and especially law. The college, rich in tradition, carried with it the echoes of men like Jefferson and Monroe, who had walked its halls before me. I often thought to myself, if such men had passed through here, could I not also shape my destiny? My professors noticed my diligence, though I was never the top student. What distinguished me was not brilliance alone, but persistence, the refusal to let go of an idea until I understood it completely. I learned that knowledge was not simply to be gathered, but to be applied, to be tested in the world beyond the classroom. By 1807, I had graduated at the age of 17. My father then arranged for me to study law under the guidance of Judge Edmund Randolph, a man who had once served as governor of Virginia and as Attorney General of the United States. Under his mentorship, I gained not just legal instruction, but also a vision of what it meant to serve the public. The study of law suited me. It required precision of thought, the careful weighing of words, the ability to argue persuasively, all skills that came naturally to me. I began practicing law in Richmond, and soon after, in Charles City County. Clients came to me, not because of wealth or influence, but because they saw in me someone who listened, who reasoned carefully, and who argued with conviction. Yet, as I practiced, I realized that my interests stretched beyond the courtroom. The law was not an end in itself, but a doorway into something larger, into the shaping of society, into the governance of the nation. Every case reminded me of the broader questions. What is justice? What is liberty? How should the authority of government be used or restrained? In those years, my father continued to guide me. Though stern, he encouraged my ambitions. He reminded me again and again that public life was not about personal glory. John, he would say, your talents are a gift, but they are a trust as well. Use them wisely, and use them for the good of Virginia. Those words became a constant echo in my mind. By my early 20s, I knew that law would be only the beginning. My true calling lay in politics. In 1811, at the age of 21, I entered the Virginia House of Delegates. I still remember the feeling of standing there, a young man among seasoned statesmen, ready to take part in shaping the laws of my state. It was intimidating, but it was also exhilarating. My journey into public service had begun, and with it, I would soon be swept into the greater currents of national politics, into debates that would define not only my career, but the destiny of the United States itself. By the year 1811, I was 21 years old. I had studied law, established a modest practice, and earned the respect of those within my community. But the call of politics had grown too strong to resist. Law sharpened my mind, but politics gave me purpose. That year, I sought election to the Virginia House of Delegates. I was young. Many thought far too young to hold such responsibility. Yet I knew that if I was to follow the example of my father and fulfill the duty instilled in me since childhood, I must step onto the public stage to my great honor. The people of Charles City County elected me. I can still recall the pride I felt, walking into the chamber of the House of Delegates for the first time. The air was thick with the voices of debate, with the weight of decisions that would shape our state and our people. I was but a novice among experienced men, yet I felt at once that I belonged, and my earliest speeches were marked by nervousness, but also by conviction. I spoke not as a polished orator, but as a man who believed deeply in the principles of liberty and limited government. I argued that Virginia must always guard her sovereignty, that the federal government was a creation of the states, not their master. These beliefs, planted in me during my youth, now took root in my public life. In those days, the nation itself stood on the edge of conflict. Relations with Great Britain had grown tense. American sailors were being impressed into service by the British Navy. Trade restrictions choked our commerce. Many in Virginia and beyond felt that honor demanded resistance. I, too, supported the idea that America must defend her sovereignty. When the War of 1812 erupted, I was an ardent supporter. Though I was young, I understood that our fledgling nation could not be seen as weak. If we failed to resist Britain's aggression, our independence would be but a hollow claim. During that war, I served not only in the legislature, but also briefly in the militia, though my role was modest compared to others. Still, the experience impressed upon me the seriousness of leadership. To send men into danger, to legislate in times of uncertainty, these were responsibilities not to be taken lightly. My service in the House of Delegates lasted several terms. It was here that I learned the craft of politics, the art of persuasion, the necessity of compromise, and the difficulty of holding to principle when the winds of opinion blew against you. One moment from those years remains vivid in my memory. A bill had been introduced that I believed encroached upon the rights of the people of Virginia. I rose to oppose it. My words were not yet refined, my delivery perhaps too impassioned, but the chamber grew silent as I spoke. When I finished, a senior delegate approached me and said, "Mr. Tyler, you are young, but your words carry weight. Use them wisely." That moment confirmed for me what I had already begun to sense. My voice could make a difference by the end of the war, and in the years that followed, my reputation as a young legislator grew. I was respected not for power or wealth. I had little of either, but for consistency. Even when I stood in the minority, I did not waver from my principles. In 1816, I took another step forward. I was elected to the United States House of Representatives. For a young man from Charles City County, it was an extraordinary honor to walk into the halls of Congress, to sit in the chamber where the great debates of the Republic were unfolding. It was a dream I had once only imagined as a boy in my father's study, but I was under no illusion. The road ahead would be difficult. In Washington, the divisions of the nation ran deep, between North and South, between those who favored a strong federal government and those, like myself, who championed the rights of the states. I knew that my convictions would put me at odds with many powerful men. Yet I also knew this. I had been raised to speak for Virginia, to uphold the principles of liberty, and to trust that right, in the end, would prevail over might. Thus began my career on the national stage, a career that would carry me from the House of Representatives to the Senate, and eventually, to the presidency itself. By the late 1830s, my political career had already spanned decades. I had served in the Virginia House of Delegates, the U.S. House of Representatives, and the Senate. I had been governor of Virginia as well. Through it all, I had remained a man of principle, sometimes to my own detriment. My devotion to states' rights often placed me at odds with the dominant powers of the day, whether they were Democrats or Whigs. That I did not seek fame, nor did I ever imagine that the presidency would one day fall into my hands. My life, as I saw it, was that of a public servant, a man who stood by his convictions even when it cost him alliances. Yet fate has a curious way of arranging events. In 1840, the Whig Party, Eager to challenge the Democrats, and President Martin Van Buren rallied behind a candidate who was known more for his heroism than his politics, William Henry Harrison. Harrison was a war hero, celebrated for his victory at the Battle of Tippecanoe decades earlier. The Whigs crafted their campaign around simple, powerful imagery: log cabins, hard cider, and the image of Harrison as a man of the people. But a presidential ticket needs balance. Harrison was from the Northwest Territory, Ohio, and the party sought a Southerner to complement him, a man with political experience who could appeal to voters in Virginia and beyond. To my surprise, they turned to me. At first, I was skeptical. I had never been entirely comfortable with the Whigs. My philosophy was not theirs. Yet they admired my reputation as a man of principle and my ability to deliver support from the South. When the Whig convention in Harrisburg placed my name on the ticket as the vice presidential candidate, I accepted, though I knew I was stepping onto uncertain ground. The campaign that followed was unlike any the nation had seen. Tippecanoe and Tyler, too, became the rallying cry. Songs were sung, parades were held, log cabins were built on wagons and rolled through towns. It was a campaign built on imagery and enthusiasm, and it swept the nation with energy. The election of 1840 was decisive. The people, weary of economic hardship under Van Buren, turned to Harrison and myself. We won by a landslide, and suddenly, I found myself Vice President of the United States. The office of Vice President, however, was not one of great power. In truth, it was often regarded as ceremonial, the presiding officer of the Senate and little more. I took my seat in the Senate chamber, prepared to serve faithfully, though I knew that my influence would be limited. But destiny had other plans. Only 1 month after taking office, President Harrison fell gravely ill. The cold and wet of his inaugural day, some said, had weakened him. Others believed his health had already been failing. Regardless of the cause, his condition worsened rapidly. I was in Williamsburg when the news reached me. On April 4, 1841, William Henry Harrison, the 9th President of the United States, was dead. The nation was stunned. Never before had a president died in office. The Constitution, though it provided for succession, was vague. Did the vice president become president in full, or merely act as a caretaker until a new election? No one knew for certain. I did not hesitate. I traveled to Washington immediately, arriving at the Capitol to find confusion and uncertainty. The cabinet, the Congress, even the Chief Justice debated what should be done. Some suggested I should serve only as acting president. Others believed I should call for a new election, but I believed firmly that the stability of the nation depended on clarity. I declared that I was not merely acting in the president's stead, I was the president. On April 6, 1841, I took the presidential oath of office, becoming the 10th president of the United States. My decision was controversial. Critics derided me as His Excellency, mocking the manner in which I had assumed power. Yet I knew that anything less than full authority would weaken the presidency and plunge the nation into chaos. If the office could not pass smoothly from one man to another, what strength would the Constitution truly hold? From that moment on, I bore the full weight of the presidency, its power, its responsibility, and its isolation. I had not sought it, yet it had found me. History had placed me in this position, and I resolved that I would not shrink from the challenge. Thus began my unexpected journey as president, a journey marked by fierce battles with Congress, bitter disputes with my own party, and decisions that would shape the destiny of our young nation. When I assumed the presidency in April of 1841, I knew I was walking into uncharted territory. Never before had a vice president inherited the office in such a manner. The eyes of the nation were upon me, and whispers of His Excellency echoed throughout the halls of Congress and the press. Yet I reminded myself daily, I was not there to be mocked or diminished. I was President of the United States, and I would govern as such. At first, many believed I would simply carry on the policies of President Harrison. After all, I had been elected on the Whig ticket. But my principles, grounded in states' rights and a suspicion of centralized power, soon clashed with the agenda of the Whig leaders, particularly Henry Clay, the great orator and political titan. Clay envisioned a strong national bank, protective tariffs, and a system of federal improvements known as the American System. To him, the presidency of William Henry Harrison, and now mine, was an opportunity to cement this vision. But I could not betray my convictions. I had opposed the Bank of the United States before, and I opposed it still. So when Congress, dominated by the Whigs, passed bills to re-establish a national bank, I wielded the power that the Constitution placed in my hands, the veto. Twice I struck down their attempts. The response was swift and fierce. My cabinet members, most of whom were loyal to Clay, resigned in protest, leaving only Daniel Webster, the Secretary of State, who chose to remain for a time. The Whigs expelled me from their party, denouncing me as a traitor. Imagine that, the President of the United States, cast out by the very party that had helped elect him. I stood alone, without a party, governing in the face of hostility from nearly every corner. It was a lonely position, but I would not abandon principle for popularity. I had not sought the presidency, but now that it was mine, I resolved to exercise it with independence. Though my vetoes created political storms, I believe they were necessary to preserve the Constitution's balance of power. To allow Congress to dictate terms unchecked would have reduced the presidency to a mere puppet office. Still, I was not a man opposed to progress. I supported measures to strengthen the economy in other ways, such as promoting trade agreements and encouraging westward expansion. I sought to preserve the Union by maintaining a careful balance between North and South, though the question of slavery loomed heavily over the nation, growing more divisive with each passing year. One of the quieter but important moments of my presidency was the Webster-Ashburton Treaty of 1842, negotiated by Daniel Webster. This treaty settled long-standing boundary disputes between the United States and Britain in the Northeast, bringing peace to areas that had teetered on the brink of conflict. I was proud to see diplomacy succeed where confrontation might have led to war. Yet it was the question of Texas that would define my presidency. The Republic of Texas, having won its independence from Mexico in 1836, stood as a sovereign nation but sought annexation into the United States. To some, this was an opportunity for expansion, for spreading American ideals across the continent. To others, it was a dangerous step that would inflame sectional tensions over slavery and risk war with Mexico. That I believed firmly that the annexation of Texas was in the national interest. It would secure our southwestern frontier, expand our territory, and demonstrate to the world that America was destined to stretch across the continent. But pursuing Texas was no easy task. Congress hesitated, deeply divided. The Whigs opposed me out of spite, unwilling to grant me a political victory. Northern politicians feared that annexation would mean the expansion of slavery, tipping the balance of power in favor of the South. Foreign powers, especially Britain, also showed keen interest in Texas, hoping to keep it independent and out of American hands. I pressed forward, negotiating directly with the Texas government. In 1844, my administration signed a treaty of annexation. But when it was presented to the Senate, it was defeated, a bitter blow, one that left me politically isolated yet again. Still, I would not relent. In my final months as president, I pushed Congress to act once more, this time by means of a joint resolution rather than a treaty. At last, in March 1845, just before I left office, Congress approved the annexation of Texas. The Lone Star Republic would soon join the Union, though it was my successor, James K. Polk, who oversaw the final admission. I knew in my heart that it was my persistence that had paved the way. My years in the White House were not easy. I governed without the support of a party, without the comfort of popular acclaim, and often in the face of ridicule. Yet I do not regret the path I chose. I defended the powers of the presidency. I preserved the Constitution as I understood it, and I laid the groundwork for America's future expansion. History may judge me harshly or kindly. That is for others to decide. But I can say this with certainty. I never wavered from the principles that guided me all my life. Independence of thought, devotion to states' rights, and an unwavering belief that the presidency must remain strong and undivided. These were the values I carried into office, and they are the values I carried out of it. When I left the presidency in March of 1845, I departed with little fanfare. My successor, James K. Polk, assumed office with the promise of fulfilling America's manifest destiny. The annexation of Texas, which I had labored so tirelessly to secure, became one of the first great milestones of his presidency. For me, however, my time as the nation's leader had ended. I returned to my beloved Virginia. to the quiet of my estate, Sherwood Forest. The property had once been modest, but I expanded it into a great plantation, giving it a name that reflected my own sense of exile. Just as Robin Hood had dwelled apart from the world, I too found myself apart, politically cast aside, yet still very much alive in spirit. Life at Sherwood Forest offered me something I had long been denied in Washington: peace. I lived among my family, worked my lands, and took joy in the simple rhythms of plantation life. My second wife, Julia Gardiner Tyler, whom I had married during my presidency, brought warmth and vitality to my later years. She was much younger than I, full of energy and charm, and together we raised a large family. Indeed, fatherhood became a defining feature of my life. By the end, I had 15 children, more than any other president in American history. The laughter of children, the bustle of family life, filled Sherwood Forest with a vibrancy that politics could never match. That I did not retreat entirely from public affairs. Neighbors and friends often sought my counsel. Though I no longer held office, my opinions still carried weight, especially in Virginia. I wrote letters, engaged in debates, and followed the currents of national politics closely. Yet I remained content to watch events unfold from the sidelines. But as the years passed, the shadows of division grew darker. The question of slavery, which had long been an uneasy undercurrent in American politics, now surged to the forefront. The North and South grew increasingly hostile toward one another, their disagreements deepening into open enmity. That I was a Virginian, a Southerner, and my sympathies lay with my state. I believed in the sovereignty of the states, in their right to govern themselves without interference from a distant federal authority. The rise of abolitionist fervor in the North, the debates over the extension of slavery into new territories, and the election of leaders who threatened Southern institutions. All these convinced me that the Union was in peril. That I in 1861, that peril became reality. The election of Abraham Lincoln triggered the secession of Southern states, and my beloved Virginia faced the fateful decision of whether to remain in the Union or join its Southern sisters. Before the final break came, I lent my voice to efforts at compromise. I presided over the Peace Conference of 1861 in Washington, a gathering of statesmen from both North and South who sought to avert civil war. We labored earnestly, crafting proposals that might preserve the Union, but the passions of the moment were too strong. The conference failed, and the march toward war could not be halted. When Virginia seceded, I cast my lot with her. Some may call it betrayal, others loyalty. To me, it was the fulfillment of the principle I had upheld all my life, that allegiance to one state must come first. I was elected to the Confederate House of Representatives, though fate would not allow me to serve long. That I in January of 1862. As the Civil War raged, I fell ill. The years of labor, the weight of politics, and the burdens of age had taken their toll. At my home in Richmond, I breathed my last on January 18, 1862. At the age of 70-1, my death was unusual in one respect. I was the only former president of the United States to die while openly allied with a government in rebellion against it. The Union, under Lincoln's administration, did not officially mourn me. But in the South, where I had cast my final allegiance, I was honored with a funeral befitting a statesman. Confederate troops escorted my body, and I was laid to rest in Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia. As I look back upon my life, I see it not as a tale of triumph or failure, but as one of steadfast conviction. I was never the most celebrated, never the most beloved. Yet I remained true to myself, to my principles, and to the ideals of independence that had guided me from my youth. History may remember me as His Excellency, the accidental president who stumbled into office. But I know myself as something more. A man who bore the weight of the presidency at a moment of crisis, who defended its authority, and who never yielded his conscience to the demands of party or popularity. And so, from the halls of Williamsburg to the chambers of Washington, from the fields of Sherwood Forest to the divided land of my final years, I lived as a son of Virginia and as a man of America, bound by duty, by principle, and by the unyielding passage of time. As I stand at the end of my story, I reflect upon a life that was never simple, never without controversy, and never entirely embraced by the world around me. I was not born to greatness, nor did I ever covet the highest office of the land. Yet, through a twist of fate, history placed the mantle of the presidency upon my shoulders, and I bore it with the strength that conviction alone can provide. That I know that many will remember me with a measure of ridicule. The name, His Excellency, may linger longer in the ears of some than any of my true accomplishments. I was the first man to step into the presidency through death, and the nation did not yet know how to respond. Yet by my firmness, by insisting that the office of president was indivisible, I gave shape to the system of succession that has endured ever since. In that alone, I left an indelible mark on the republic. I was also a president without a party. Cast aside by the Whigs, distrusted by the Democrats, I governed in isolation. But perhaps that very solitude was what allowed me to act independently, to measure my decisions not against the will of a party, but against the dictates of my conscience. My vetoes, my resistance to Henry Clay's grand designs, my determination to preserve the strength of the presidency. All of these sprang from the belief that the Constitution must be upheld above ambition or popularity. Yet my time in office was not defined only by battles with Congress. I sought peace abroad and stability at home. The Webster-Ashburton Treaty eased tensions with Britain, and though the question of Texas nearly broke me, I persisted until annexation was secured, setting the stage for America's expansion westward. That achievement, though clouded by sectional controversy, proved to be one of the most consequential decisions in our nation's history. Still, my later years remind us that no man can escape the tides of his time. I lived long enough to see the Union I had served with devotion fracture before my eyes. I chose to follow my state of Virginia into the Confederacy, believing that loyalty to one's homeland was the truest measure of duty. Some will judge that choice harshly. Others will understand it as an act of fidelity to the principles I had long embraced. History, impartial and enduring, will render its verdict. And so, as I close this account of my life, I leave behind not a tale of glory, but a testament to conviction. I was a man of contradictions, a president by chance, a statesman without a party, a Virginian who became both a servant of the Union and, in the end, a supporter of secession. But above all, I was a man who remained true to his beliefs, even when the cost was loneliness, derision, or obscurity. I lived as I thought right. I governed as I thought just, and I died as I had lived, steadfast, unyielding, and resolved. If the future remembers me, let it not be for the accidents of my life, but for the certainty of my principles. For in the end, what defines a man is not how he enters history, but how he remains faithful to himself as history unfolds.